Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about teamwork with Katie Crawford. Katie, welcome.
Hi, Dad. Thank you so much for having me.
Super delighted to have you on. Really excited to unpack all things teamwork with you. But Katie, let's start where we always do. I'd love to learn a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your work.
Absolutely. So I'm originally from Canada, but I kind of grew up all over North America. I grew up in a sports household. My dad worked in pro sports, so by nature we moved around a lot. So from St. John's, Newfoundland, small town Eastern Ontario, Quebec City, Denver, Colorado, Vancouver, Los Angeles, back to Vancouver. But I call Vancouver home, and that's where I spent most of my kind of formative years. Finished high school there, and then went on to university, where I did my bachelor's at the University of British Columbia, where I also played collegiate volleyball, which is in the CIS now. It's called U Sports. Kind of after graduation, I worked a lot of odd jobs. I taught sex ed in high schools. I bartended, did some customer service. I worked at the suicide hotline in Vancouver. And then I've always coached youth volleyball kind of throughout my playing career. I never thought academia or sports psychology would be the path for me, but I wound up back to the University of British Columbia, where I did my master's with Dr. Mark Beauchamp, who I know is a friend of the show. He's been on before. My master's thesis, which was published last year, looked at the help-seeking behaviors of professional ice hockey athletes. Also during my master's, I started to get more into the applied side. So I did my mental performance coach, as we kind of call it in North America, internship. And now I'm in the last stages of completing my CMPC certification through ASP, the American Association for Sports Psych. Again, kind of towards the end of the master's, COVID hit. So I figured the job prospects would be quite limited. So I saw a tweet from Dr. Desmond McEwan here in Bath, where I am now, looking for a PhD student. Again, kind of at every stage, I always said, like, this is it. I'm not going to go any further. After the bachelor's, I was like, I'm done. After the master's, I was like, I am done. But Desi put out the tweet. I had met him at a Christmas dinner with Dr. Mark Beauchamp. And yeah, next thing I knew, I was on a plane in the middle of COVID to here to Bath. And I've been here now for 3.5 years doing my doctoral work, looking at teamwork and teamwork kind of antecedents, both looking at specifically coaching and teamwork training or team building. I've also now gotten the amazing opportunity through my research to start doing some applied work here in Bath with Bath Rugby. So the Premiership rugby team, I'm working in their academy, kind of working with their 18 to 23-year-old kind of potential prospects. So yeah, here we are, kind of coming, hopefully, fingers crossed, to the end of the PhD. And I mean it this time, that is it for her school. No more university after this.
That was an eclectic mix of jobs you had prior to heading back to your master's degree.
Definitely. Yeah. Kind of all over the shop. It's quite funny, like looking back, it obviously all kind of signs pointed to kind of doing work in this area between the coaching, getting into more of the mental health side at the suicide hotline, the bartending, the social skills that I kind of picked up through there, the customer service jobs. But kind of the one thing I always said that I was clearly attracted to, whether, conscious of it or not, was I just loved awkward conversations, whether that was teaching sex ed or, obviously heavy conversations on the suicide hotline or dealing with really angry customers about their experience. I've always just kind of been attracted to awkward, tricky conversations.
It's really interesting because although my background is not the same as yours, not as eclectic in terms of profession, I always say that my experiences as a professional golf coach probably had the most profound impact on my career as a sports psychologist. The socio-cultural landscape that I was involved in every single day, the ability to socialize, work with, teach people from different cross sections of society was so profound and really, really helped me, my training as a sports psychologist, and helps me today, sort of 2 decades on.
Well, especially in golf, like it's so long. Like you're going for these essentially like long walks where you're spending very little time actually quote unquote doing the sport, and you're spending the vast majority of your time, I'm assuming, walking with your athletes and having to chat. And I'm assuming you can't be talking golf for all 18 holes.
Oh, I don't know. You don't know golfers then. Golfers can tell golfers can talk golf. That's for sure. Just returning to your background, really interesting in terms of your movement around Canada as a consequence of your dad being a sports coach. Just may I ask what sport he coached and to what level?
So my dad coached hockey or ice hockey, as I
Ah,
have to distinguish here in the UK. People always say I'm the ultimate Canadian cliche.
right.
Um, but yeah, grew up in an ice hockey house, and he coached professionally. So in the National Hockey League, and he now coaches in the Swiss Elite League in Zurich.
Oh, wow. And when you when you reflect back, I'm sure that because you were a volleyball player, when you reflect back in your participation in volleyball, did you have quite a lot of conversations with your dad about learning and performance and engagement in your sport? And did psychology ever come into that? Was he a fan of psychology? Is that sort of where your love for psychology grew from?
Uh, yes and no.
Okay,
So I
okay.
was quite the rebel. I refused to play ice hockey just because I was so desperate to be different.
Mhm.
So I chose volleyball. I don't know why. I'm 5'8", which if anyone knows volleyball is I'm essentially miniature in the sport. But he took a while to warm up to volleyball as a sport. It is a tricky sport to watch at the youth level. Like it doesn't quite get quote unquote exciting or interesting until the athletes are developed enough to kind of rally. So I think once I hit about 15, he was like, okay, I can kind of see where this is going. And then for sure, like, incredibly supportive sports dad, as you can imagine. Um, loved coming to whatever tournaments that he was able to come to, a lot of long drives in the car on the way home. And he was definitely the type where it was great because I picked a sport that he didn't know. So I had a much different experience kind of talking sport with him than my brother who did play ice hockey, which kind of worked to my advantage and disadvantage at times. But he was always always a kind of a big advocate of like never cared about how many kills I got or how much playing time I was getting, but was definitely like the first person to call me out if I wasn't working hard or if I wasn't being a good teammate or if those types of things. So that was always really ingrained in me, kind of that process versus outcome, even though we probably didn't call it that back in my youth. But it was interesting growing up because my brother now also works in pro sports. He's working in the National Hockey League as a video coach or an analyst.
Okay.
And those conversations in the car, like, his questions of my dad were always very analytical, technical, tactical, like who's going to be in net tonight, who's going to be on the power play, who's going to be on the penalty kill. And my questions were always much more like these bizarre hypotheticals. I'd be like, okay, your coaching staff is not able to make the game today, and you have to appoint 3 players to be the coaches for the night. Who are you picking? So you can see, back then the writing was on the wall. Like my brother has now gone into this
Absolutely.
very technical, tactical, analytical side of the sport, and I've gone into group dynamics, which again, I don't think we were thinking about that in the back of the minivan in 2002, but here we are.
That's so interesting. That's so funny. Your sports psychology career started early with your hypothetical questions to your dad.
Yeah.
Did he deal with them with good grace? Did he answer you? Did he answer you in any depth when it came to your hypothetical questions?
I always say he was excellent at playing along,
Okay,
and he still does to this day because the hypotheticals have not stopped.
they've probably become more sophisticated.
I hope so. I really hope so.
Well, we're here today to talk about, it's a topic, Katie, that we haven't spoken enough about on the Sports Psych Show. So I'm so thrilled that we're going to be talking about teamwork today. We're going to be unpacking a paper that you've done alongside some fantastic sports psychologists and previous guests on the Sports Psych Show, Rachel Arnold, Carly McKay, and Desi McEwan, as you mentioned. The paper is entitled Coaching Teamwork: Team Sport Athletes and Coaches' Perceptions of How Coaches Facilitate Teamwork. So let's dive in. Teamwork. Can you define that for me? What is teamwork?
Right. The trickier question, because I often get challenged, whether that's by other sports psychologists or editors at journals, about what is teamwork and how is it different from some of these other constructs that we might be more familiar with, especially constructs like team cohesion and task cohesion. So I'll do my best to try to distinguish. So when we look at teamwork, we see it as a team process that focuses really on the collaborative. And the key here is the observable behaviors of team members as they try to achieve their aims. So really, really simply put, teamwork is what we can see teams doing. And we see it as unfolding in sort of these episodic cycles. So it kind of looking at from game to game. So we have kind of 5 main aspects of teamwork. The first being preparation. So how do we prepare? How do we set goals? How do we action plan? Then we move into kind of the teamwork execution, which is kind of the nuts and bolts. How do we communicate, coordinate, cooperate? So again, these are the really, like, what can we see the team doing? Can we see and hear them talking to one another? Can we see the flow of their movements, that they're in the right spots at the right times and they're reading their teammates and getting to, open spaces on the field or on the ice or on the pitch? And are they kind of working in unison? So that cooperation piece is, are we working as a unit? Are we working as one? Are we looking out for our teammates and filling in gaps that they might be slow to get to? So the example we use for cooperation a lot is like a rugby scrum. You can have, really strong players, but if everyone's not kind of pushing in the same direction, it doesn't really matter. So then we move on to kind of our post game, which would be when we're evaluating. So we're reflecting on both our performance and also on kind of the systems that help us perform. So what did we do well in this game? What did we do poorly? And then also, were there any sort of external factors that contributed? Do we have the necessary resources that we need to perform at sort of the highest level and to work together to the best of our ability? And then last, we have adjustments. So we've evaluated and now we need to make some changes, whether that's looking at problem solving or finding new innovative ways to kind of adjust our performance. And then the last aspect kind of sits we say kind of above and around. And these are kind of those interpersonal dynamics. So we're looking at psychological support. So our teammates looking out for each other, are they helping one another? Are they being kind of, emotionally and psychologically there for one another? And then finally, conflict. And how do we manage conflict as opposed to avoiding conflict? How do we address it when it comes up in a productive way?
All fascinating. I'm going to take you back to the beginning of your description, because what I think I heard you say was you're differentiating between teamwork and, let's say, something like team cohesion. Am I correct in saying that? I think this is really, really interesting in terms of your definition of it. What I'm hearing here, what I'm thinking, teamwork being behaviors. How are you differentiating that to something like, let's say, team cohesion?
Dead on. So the key is that teamwork's really looking at those observable behaviors, whereas something like task cohesion is what we call an emergent state. So the way I look at it is it's looking at sort of like cognitions, attitudes, motivations, affects, states towards the group. So again, less about what can we see, what can we hear the athletes or the teams doing versus these more kind of attitudes, cognitions, and affective states that we see more in sort of task cohesion or team cohesion more broadly.
So would you say that team cohesion is a little bit more covert? It's kind of it's thought processes, as you said. You use the term cognition. It's thought processes, affect being the psychological term for feeling. It's a bit more covert. It's a little less in your face. Whereas what you're saying is teamwork is a bit more obvious. It's a bit more it's behavioural, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. Team cohesion kind of is existing beneath the surface, and teamwork is again, it's always kind of at the surface. You can see it happening, and again, they're related. They feed into one another. They can be reciprocal. The more cohesive you are, the better you are to work together, and so on. But again, really trying to distinguish between what we can see and hear athletes doing.
And I suppose as sports psychologists, I think of this as this kind of definition is a gateway to the link between the psychological or mental side of or component of sport with that link with the technical, tactical, physical. Because when we talk about behavioural here, obviously teamwork isn't just communication. It's also playing together.
Mm.
It's coordinate. As you mentioned this earlier, within one of the four components or five components, you can see coordination tactically or technically or strategically. So there's with this definition, there's a neat link between the psychological, the technical, tactical, physical. Am I following you there correctly?
Absolutely. Like I always say, teamwork is like the ultimate Trojan horse
Okay.
for sports psychology because what coach doesn't want their team to work together, doesn't want their team to communicate, doesn't want their team to coordinate, doesn't want their team to evaluate their performance effectively. And again, I find often with some of these constructs, they can be quite abstract and kind of difficult to kind of hold or kind of see, especially when you're dealing with someone who doesn't spend a whole PhD studying them. But that's why I love the concept of teamwork, is because it's not necessarily easy to comprehend, but when I say like it's what you can see these athletes doing, I often see kind of in coaches, especially that kind of light bulb of, oh, okay, I can deal with this, I can handle this.
And those and just again reflecting back what I heard you say, four core components of teamwork. You mentioned the fifth, which was overarching, but four core
Mhm.
components. Preparation. So we're doing the things that help us prepare to teams, such as setting performance goals, for example, and strategizing team plans. And then we're doing the things to execute from a team perspective, the coordination, the communication, the cooperation, that evaluation piece. So post game, teamwork is essentially critically assessing performance, together, and then that adjustment component or adjustment phase is the response to the analysis. It's problem solving. How do we get better here? Again, am I hearing this correctly?
Nailed it, Dan. Nailed it.
I'm learning all the time. Every day's a school day. Okay, great. And so tell me a little bit about, I'm assuming what we've discussed that definition of teamwork, those five components frame this research project. Could you tell me a little bit about the genesis of this research project? So what were you trying to discover? Were you trying to uncover? And how are you using this definition? How are you using those four components? Were they involved at all? Can you unpack the beginnings of this research project for me?
Absolutely. So typically, this is a typical kind of COVID project. This is the first study that I did as part of my PhD. So, what we do know about teamwork is we have this beautiful model by McEwan and Beauchamp that kind of describes kind of those 4 and 5 aspects that I just listed. But it also follows what we call sort of like an inputs, mediators, outputs model. So we know a lot about what teamwork is, what does it look like, we're able to measure it now. Got a measure for teamwork. We're able to, there's been an intervention for teamwork. So we know that, teamwork training can help promote teamwork. But what we know less about is kind of at the front of this model about kind of the antecedents, the inputs, this kind of how question. So how do we maximize, optimize teamwork? So we know what it is, we know how to measure it, but how do we get teams, or in this case, how do we get coaches to promote and maximize teamwork? So that's where this study came out of, was really kind of more of an exploratory, investigation from the perspectives of both athletes and coaches from sort of team sports, or what we call interdependent team sports. So your sports like football, soccer, volleyball, basketball, ice hockey, as opposed to teams where you might train together, but you don't necessarily compete all together. and really looking at that kind of how question. So how do coaches day to day optimize the teamwork within their squads, or often as well, how do they inhibit it?
So take me through the method here. Take me through what you specifically did.
What we did is we recruited team sport athletes and coaches just to participate in an interview. Took them kind of through a sort of a semi-structured interview process, asked them questions again related to the aspects. We kind of covered things like preparation, execution, evaluation, adjustments, and that what we call those kind of interpersonal bits, that management of team maintenance. And really looking at those sort of like that, those hows. So how do coaches maximize preparation? How do coaches maximize execution? And so on and so forth. And then we came up with sort of 3 higher order themes, and then within those sort of nine sub themes, really trying to get at these 3 answers to this how question, which I'm sure we're going to go through.
Before we go through those, because we absolutely need to unpack those, how many coaches did you interview? How many players?
So we interviewed 7 coaches and 8 athletes from a range of sports. I think we had some rugby, ice hockey, volleyball, basketball, curling, a range of competition levels as well. Okay. So we had some from youth, we had some professional, quite a few collegiate, different nationalities, gender, so men's and women's sports, male and female coaches. So really kind of what we call a maximum variation sample, really just trying to get cast a huge net into how these different coaches from these different avenues promote teamwork in their squads.
Well, let's unpack these results. You talked about 3 higher order themes, which had 9 themes underneath them. So let's go through these. I mean, the first higher order theme that came through from the interviews was crafting a teamwork recipe. Tell me a little bit about this, Katie.
So first and foremost, I have to apologize for the corniness of this metaphor, but
I love it.
We're going to lean in because research needs to get corny.
And it's a great gateway for you writing a book in the future as well, because that's definitely chapter 1, crafting a teamwork recipe. That's going to be your future bestseller. Hey, chapter 1.
Any publishers listening, hit me up.
Yes.
So crafting the teamwork recipe. So really we're looking at team composition. Who's on your roster? Who do you got on your team sheet? What can coaches do to ensure that they're setting their squads, their teams up for success with regards to their personnel? So, you're going to the supermarket or the grocery store, and you got to get the best, highest quality ingredients that are gonna meld together. Maybe in a very traditional way, maybe in more of a unique, unorthodox way. But nonetheless, it's doing this with a lot of intention and with teamwork in mind.
Recruit well, basically.
Easy as that.
So is that the first theme under crafting teamwork recipe?
So the first one would be the collecting of the ingredients. So this is your kind of talent ID. So we see a lot in kind of talent ID about the technical, the tactical, the physical. We're seeing more and more sort of the psychological pieces being considered. But what we see a little bit, I think often less of, are those interpersonal skills. Like quite simply, like, do you play nice with others? Are you a good teammate? Do you understand what it means to be a team player? What does that look like and sound like, and what are those behaviors within your specific squad? Because it might not look the same for every team, but on your team, quote unquote, what does a good teammate look like? What does a good team player look like?
Well, picking out a quote from one of the interviews with the coaches here, who was quite harsh on one of their athletes. I'll read out the quote here. I had many conversations with this difficult athlete because they came to me, and I felt that it was only fair to give her a chance, and we did give her a chance. One of her teammates came to my hotel room one night just ready to kill her, so I had to go that route and cut her from the team. She's just not a team player. Yeah, you should go play tennis. That's what I told her.
I got some pushback on that quote, and I was like, no, we have to include it. First of all, absolutely no disrespect to the tennis community. This is not a slight on you. Big tennis fan, and also understand that tennis is a team sport when we talk about the doubles game. So first of all, please, no hate to the tennis community out there. But what I love about this quote is I think so often coaches are kind of stuck in that what I kind of call the difficult athlete versus that kind of talent payoff. So how much sort of difficult character are you going to kind of allow or put up with within your squad, in the name of talent or in the name of a great player? And we see this, right to the top. And, there's no kind of clear answer. I wish we had a clear, like, we will accept X amount of difficulty to X amount of talent. But it's a question that I think coaches are constantly having to ask themselves, what are you willing to kind of put up with in the name of talent, but maybe at the expense of, like, this other teammate who clearly was very much struggling with this person. And we see so many examples of this in sport where, a team will get rid of a highly talented player or trade them away, and then all of a sudden things start to fall into place. And that's not to say that it's all on the one individual, that they're the sole reason a team might be struggling, but it is to say that, like I say, like, being able to play nice with others, it counts.
Yeah, no, it's what's going through my head at the moment is that kind of, as you mentioned, there can tend to be, not all the time, but there can tend to be a converse relationship between talent, if we're going to use that word, or high ability and agreeableness. In as much as a lot of players with a lot of ability can be quite low agreeable, at least in my experience. Again, not all, but they can be. Maybe because they're just very good at their game, and maybe sometimes they perceive they don't have to do things that their coach wants them to do, or they don't have to play along with the teammate, or perhaps they see the world differently from teammates who aren't quite as good. So I think there's a relationship, and I'm really pleased that you included that quote, because I think, as somebody who's at the coalface with teams, you have conversations like that with coaches. That's a genuine reflection on a challenge that coach is facing with a player. It's not all, sunshine and roses in there in teams, and coaches have to deal with human beings who can be challenging. No question, Kate, but just a thought back at you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say we get rid of every difficult athlete, but sometimes those non-agreeable athletes are amazing disruptors, and they make people think, and they make people bring their A game. You look at someone like a Kobe Bryant, who was potentially challenging, but all of his teammates would speak to the way that he, raised the level in training, and he pushed people, even if it was at times, a bit spiky.
Yes. And we saw that with Michael Jordan in The Last Dance. And, and as sports psychologists, we would all orient then towards, psychological frameworks that can help coaches to linguistically deal with those players. The use of motivational interviewing, the use of empathy and open questioning is just coaching them in a different manner, essentially. But moving on to the next themes, what's next? So we've covered there the collecting the teamwork ingredients, creative ingredient combinations.
Yes. So this gets to getting the right people in the right spots. And sometimes, when you're looking at a dish, that's getting all of your really high quality ingredients, your Kobe beef, your super organic veg, and getting the top qualities. But sometimes that's getting creative and putting things that maybe on paper don't go together, but when you put them together, it's magic. And really, it's having coaches really think about the way that they're making combinations, whether that's their lineups that they're putting out on the ice or out on the pitch, and really sort of kind of looking for those magic combinations. And sometimes those magic combinations aren't necessarily with, if you're looking at a basketball team, like the five most skilled players on the floor at once, finding those kind of role players that, again, maybe take the dish from, good to great. And it might not be the most obvious thing all the time.
So is this, when we're speaking here about creative ingredient combinations, is this as a consequence of playing styles, or personality traits, or could be both?
I'd say both, without a doubt. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely like a certain. I think the quote I included, was from Coach Veronica, and she talks about from a player perspective, she would often get very frustrated with her coaches because they would put these lineup combinations out on the floor that she couldn't quite understand because from her perspective there were better players on the bench. But now from a coaching perspective, she's seeing that there's a certain teamwork, and there's a certain kind of teamwork execution that happens with particular combinations that don't necessarily mean the five best players are on the floor at the same time, whether that be because of their personalities or their different skill sets that complement one another. But again, it was interesting in that quote to see the shift from an athlete perspective, and now this athlete being in a coach role.
Yeah, and it makes me think I could geek out on that one because it makes me think of the episodes where we talked about the perceptual cognitive sides of the game, whether with Gaia Jordet with his scanning, or visual exploratory behaviours, or with Professor Mark Williams, Professor Nikki Hodges, when we talked about the cognitive side, the perceptual cognitive side, and sometimes it could be that some players see what each other see. It could go that deep, but. On to the next underpinning theme here, which is bringing the ingredients to life. Tell us a little bit about this.
Right. So bringing the ingredients to life, this really has to do with defining roles, allocating roles, and really sort of celebrating all roles. So again, leaning into this corny metaphor, does every ingredient know why they're in the dish? Are you the main protein source? Are you the center of the dish? Are you the garnish? Are you the seasoning that does not, appear on the surface, but really without it, there's no flavor? And I think what we, discovered through these interviews was that the coaches play such a key role in making sure that every athlete or every ingredient knows why it's there, why it's in the dish. It's given the right role, and that everybody knows, and everybody's there to celebrate, whether you are the Kobe beef or you're the salt and pepper.
And as you were speaking, it was making me think. Again, we're going to use basketball here as an example. That classic documentary, The Last Dance, and I think back to, and I wrote a bit about this when it first came out. Just fascinating around Dennis Rodman and how Phil Jackson, worked with Dennis Rodman.
Mm.
Dennis Rodman really understood his role within the team. It's that certainty, isn't it, Katie? When somebody has certainty of responsibilities, certainty of role, certainty of tasks within that team setup, they've got more of a chance of displaying the correct behaviors and doing so, with their teammate. So that teamwork improves. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're at these high levels, everybody wants to compete. Everybody wants the most amount of minutes and the biggest role possible. But we know in team sport that that's just not the case. Not everybody can be Michael Jordan. Some people have to be Dennis. And I think where coaches can play such a pivotal role is just letting Dennis know, how important his part is, and how without him, the whole dish can really fall apart. And again, and also getting the whole kind of team on board that we celebrate every role, we celebrate every player, whether you're scoring 50 points or you're getting those critical 10 rebounds.
So this first higher order theme, crafting a teamwork recipe, had three sub-themes: collecting the teamwork ingredients, creative ingredient combinations, and bringing the ingredients to life. The second higher order theme, come together, stay together. Give us a few words about this second higher order theme.
Relationship building, interpersonal dynamics, rapport, connection. This is really what this theme's trying to get at.
Makes me think of the work of Professor Sophia Jarrett at Loughborough University. She's been on the show before talking about the importance of coach-athlete relationships, but then so many of our episodes talk about that important relationship. Underneath this higher order theme, are some sub themes, and the first one being cultivating coach athlete connection. And that word connection, I think that was number one in Sophia Jarrett's work in terms of coach athlete relationships. So tell us a little bit about cultivating coach athlete connection.
So looking at coach athlete connection, I think it's important, and this is actually a great segue from your last one of the last episodes I've listened to with Karen Hagland.
Yes.
Really looking at, when we look at teamwork, and on the surface it might seem like a really kind of technical construct, but it really is like an incredibly vulnerable process when we talk about communicating, having to be a voice out there on the pitch, on the field. You look at a rookie player or first year player having to get onto the field or the ice and having to speak can be really daunting. Having to evaluate and reflect on your performance can be very vulnerable. Having to say, I didn't do this well, I think we need to do better on this. And really, as a sort of facilitator of those behaviors, is that groundwork of rapport and making sure that people feel safe and connected to go out and kind of do those concrete teamwork behaviors. And so one of the things we saw was that coach athlete connection. There's no shortcut to rapport. You have to take the time to understand where your athletes have come from, their backgrounds, their histories, their goals, their motivations, their values. And I think coaches can often be really kind of hesitant to kind of go down that route. And I know Karen talked about that a lot in her episode, that there's kind of almost this fear, well, if I give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And I think we can often, coaches can be, again, really intimidated to have those sorts of conversations. And I think it's also important for them to recognize that it doesn't have to be this big, kumbaya hand-holding conversation. It can be something as simple as genuinely answering the question how your weekend was without just saying, yeah, it was fine. Whether it's, talking about your own background or your own playing history, or, just sharing simple things like what you're watching on Netflix, at night after training.
Listening to what you're saying is making me think of the word authenticity, being authentic in that relationship. It's not just asking for the sake of asking or starting a conversation for the sake of starting a conversation. It's, I suppose, less instrumental and more authentic, less sort of purposefully leaning to it, or I have to establish a relationship, rather actually being involved in that relationship. But also under this sub theme, I like where you've taken this, because actually there almost feels a note of caution here, because you have included some quotes around potentially the importance of, retaining a coach athlete relationship from whether you call it a hierarchical perspective or just a role perspective. I'm going to quote from what athlete L said here about the relationship. She said, "I don't love it when coaches are trying to be your friend or trying to get involved super personally. I see respect and interest in your life is nice, but he's our coach. We're all able to respect him that way and take him seriously in that sense because," and I'm paraphrasing here, but because he's not like a friend. And I think that's really interesting. And before getting your response, I mean, just underneath athlete L's quote there, athlete Zoe talks about the importance of assistant coaches. She said, "My two assistant coaches are the people that will check in on us. We can express our full-hearted opinions with those assistant coaches, and I've opened up about my fears and my issues and stuff like that." And it sounded like Zoe wasn't necessarily in a position where she felt she could have that conversation with the head coach. So that's a canny way for a head coach to utilize assistants. So quite a few little mini themes coming through there. But that balance, yes, we're saying connection is important, relationships are important, authenticity, and also just retaining that coach athlete relationship. It doesn't have to be a friendship.
Absolutely. And I think, I often think of like parent child relationships. Like, you often hear parents say things like, I'm your parent, I can't be your friend. But again, I think there's a sense of their role is to sort of guide and to make difficult decisions and to have to, disappoint people at times. and having to make tough, whether it be, roster decisions or playing time decisions. And that's not to say that you have to keep incredible distance and you can't get close to your athletes, but there's a balance to these things, like anything. And having to have, a sense of stability. And I think sometimes those boundaries can get really blurred when those kind of, relationships veer into that more of that friendship arena.
Under this higher order theme of come together, stay together, we've talked about the sub theme there of cultivating coach athlete connection. And the next sub theme, fostering relationships between teammates. Broaden that for us a little bit.
So one of the things that came up was coaches' roles in that fostering of athlete to athlete or teammate relationships. So both developing rapport between teammates as both kind of a safety net for one another, to look at things like communal coping around shared stressors, and really looking at the coach's role in kind of helping athletes forge those relationships. And one of the quotes that I talked about was how a coach did this within his own training and giving athletes time to sort of connect in training, finding these kind of cute little pockets for athletes to ask questions about one another that they might not, with people they might not naturally gravitate towards, but also kind of, creating a climate where the athletes feel like they can kind of depend on one another and form these relationships.
And then a final sub theme here is managing perceived in brackets, but managing perceived favoritism. Tell us a little bit about this.
So this theme, was really interesting. So again, because we interviewed both athletes and coaches, this was the one theme that was much more prevalent amongst the athlete participants. So when you ask an athlete, does your coach have a favorite? They're so quick to be like, oh yeah, it's so and so. But when you ask coaches, do you have a favorite? They're so quick to say, no. I love all my athletes equally, which I always find is a really kind of interesting phenomenon. And again, the reason that I have the perceived in brackets is because it doesn't really matter whether or not, the coach does or doesn't have favorites. It's all about the kind of the perception that these athletes are absorbing, that certain players are, whether it be getting special treatment, have more leeway in terms of kind of what they can get away with both on or off court, and really kind of the impact that this can have in the athlete's capacity to work together.
Yeah, I'm just picking out a few quotes here. Again, going back to athlete L, saying he would play most of the time his favourites, even if they were struggling, he would keep them on. And sometimes you wonder if sometimes this is almost something that coaches aren't necessarily aware of. I hesitate to use the word subconscious, but it's almost just like a subconscious bias or an unconscious bias. And this sort of sub theme makes me think of the importance of metacognition in coaching practice, that thinking about behavior, being aware of self, and how actually you might have some of these subconscious biases or unconscious biases that influences your behavior. So your behavior is oriented to this one individual all the time. You don't see it, but others see it. I'm kind of riffing on this here, but this sub theme made me think of, and what you said made me think of that.
Riff away. It's not to say that I think coaches are like lying when they say they don't have favorites. I absolutely, again, it's really about this kind of perception and the way athletes are absorbing coach behaviors. Like, athletes are laser focused into the decisions their coaches are making, and they're so aware of the patterns of whether it has to do with a certain individual or a certain group of individuals or a certain type of individual that seems to be getting X treatment or Y treatment. And again, that's not to say that, again, like you said, that these are conscious behaviors, that the coach is consciously trying to, segregate two groups of athletes or make a hierarchy within their team. But again, I think athletes can be, really perceptive or really kind of sensitive to these types of patterns.
Okay, so that was our second higher order theme. Come together, stay together. Cultivating coach-athlete connection, fostering relationships between teammates, and managing perceived favoritism. Our third higher order theme, maximizing teamwork in action. So this is the action part. Tell us a little bit about this.
So, we've got the right people, they're in the right places, everyone's connected up. Now we can really focus on these sort of teamwork execution behaviors. So, the first sort of sub theme is our team first tactics. So, most coaches are hyper ingrained in their tactical systems, their offensive systems, their defensive systems, and crafting plays and whatnot. But again, how do we consider teamwork and team processes in those tactical systems? So, do our tactical systems focus on sort of shared responsibility, lots of different people making contributions, not overloading or burdening kind of quote unquote star, I'm using air quotes, star players? So, again, really trying to meld teamwork into tactics.
Our second theme, empowering athlete-led teamwork.
So kind of, I think I mentioned this earlier. A lot of coaches, we have so much coming out about athlete autonomy and autonomy focused coaching. And I think, again, coaches can be really kind of hesitant and get a bit, nervous about this idea of, if I give an inch, they're going to take a mile. And really trying to find ways to empower, athlete voice, athlete decisions in big and small ways. So two things that kind of came up within this theme was finding ways for athletes to kind of lead these teamwork aspects, whether that be leading a team brief before a game or kind of identifying keys to the game. Doesn't necessarily have to be a captain. It definitely can be, but it can also be a sort of unofficial leader as well. And then the other kind of term that came up from this was this idea of shared language. So something as simple as giving athletes the decision to like name plays or have like team mottos or different celebrations that they do can really be kind of small ways that have big impact in terms of athlete empowerment.
Yeah, I feel from my work and my experiences within teams, these two sub themes. I mean, obviously, all the sub themes go hand in hand, but these two sub
Mm,
themes really go hand in hand in terms of team first tactics and empowering athlete led teamwork. As you mentioned, the importance of autonomy supportive coaching and how coaches can actually drive team first tactics within their sessions by being autonomy supportive. I think of times where I've helped coaches to initiate group conversations between activities in sessions, just getting players talking. You might have leaders or senior players driving this, but getting players
mm,
talking to create those shared mental models, that shared language as you're referring to there, and to share experiences. Again, you can almost come back to the perceptual cognitive side of things here, the ability to see what each other see out there on the pitch, that really smacks of that team first tactics, that it's not just about one player, but it's about all of us having a shared lens of the world, of our performance landscape, essentially. So reading through this and listening to what you're saying, I'm thinking of these two sub themes really working hand in hand out on the pitch is a very practical approach here.
yeah, absolutely. Bingo.
The third theme, breeding healthy internal competition. I'm assuming healthy and internal competition, the combination is quite important.
So much easier said than done.
Yes.
Yeah, so really looking at, again, especially when we get to these higher levels, like players, athletes want to play. Athletes want minutes. They want to be on the power play. They want to be in the big moments. And unfortunately, in team sport, we kind of talked about this earlier when we talked about, the different ingredients. Is unfortunately, there's such a need for role players, and part of that is, not players getting complacent and just accepting kind of roles they don't necessarily want to be in, but again, using that kind of training environment to really allow athletes to be competitive and to kind of fight for those key roles. However, then the challenge is that then having this high competitive environment in the training, how does that then translate to game day where you might have to sit on the bench and cheer on that teammate that beat you out in training and is in that kind of quote unquote starting spot that you wanted? And how do coaches sort of facilitate that high competitive environment in training, and then translate that into a kind of supportive competitive environment where athletes are being supportive of one another. They're not sitting on the bench pouting or sulking because they didn't get, the playing time they wanted, or they're not in the spot that they wanted to be in, and just the challenges of that.
Well, I think that final point is such a massive thing in team sport, isn't it? That you are going to have to leave. Coaches are going to have to leave players on the bench, and those players aren't going to play, and they're going to be disappointed. I mean, there's just picking up a quote here from Coach Ted. He said they've got to have a respect for the process. So he's obviously referring to this all as a process. They've got to have respect for the process. If they've fallen out of favour, it's not forever. And these are the things they need to do to fall back into favour. So, unpicking what he's saying there, this is a process. You might fall out of favour, but that doesn't mean it's going to be forever. And he's communicating these are the things that are going to help you get back into the team. He continues to say, you've got to tell the guy on the bench, you've got to be a positive upbeat, because when you get your moment, you want other people to be that way for you. That's what part of being a team is about. This isn't tennis. Coach Ted has something against tennis here. This isn't tennis. This isn't an individual sport. It's a team sport, and you have to be a good teammate. Reflecting on what he's saying there from a team perspective, absolutely. And I, clearly this gives us clues in terms of how Coach Ted is trying to communicate with those who are on the bench. These are the behaviours we want to see. This is the open door that you've got to get back in the team. This is how you're going to do it. I'm going to help you to do it, and so on and so forth. Oh, and by the way, this isn't tennis.
Again, apologies to the tennis community. We're big fans of you over here. Just to protect Coach Ted, the other tennis quote was from a different coach. So
Okay.
I don't know if that makes it better or worse. But no, yeah, absolutely. Like I think it's one of the most tricky things that coaches have to navigate is those kind of shifts in roster and shifts in starting lineups, whether that's the excitement of someone moving up, or the the heartbreak of someone getting moved out, and trying to keep people engaged and aware. Coach called it the kind of the team process, and I kind of see it as everybody being aligned and enthusiastic and excited about getting the team forward, even if that is at the detriment of your own sort of individual performance or opportunities. And that's extremely challenging. So much easier said than done.
Well, absolutely fascinating stuff. And obviously there's a discussion piece to any research paper. I'll reflect back to you, listening to yourself and reading through this paper, what it makes me think, and then perhaps you can give me your thoughts, Katie. I'm, as a sports psychologist, working with teams and individuals every single day, and individuals within teams. I'm passionate about teams having frameworks for the mental side of their game. And that could be frameworks around mental skills. It could be frameworks around effective learning. And obviously we want a framework, or I believe we want a framework around team building. Because so often what happens at the coalface is these casual conversations that coaches can have, which are very effective conversations at times and filled with insight, but they're not necessarily backed by any kind of evidence-informed process. And for me, this is what I think, the combination of the work of Mark Beauchamp and Desi McEwan and now yourself and your other colleagues here have provided and are providing for coaches is this gives a framework for evidence-informed coaching practice around developing a team, working to build a team. And I think that that's absolutely vital, because I think what these frameworks do is they can help spark great conversation, and then it helps us to reflect on what we're doing. How did that go? That's in line with our evidence-informed approach. Did that work? What could we have done better? And so on and so forth. So this is where I just think this is so important. These kind of things are so important, and this research is so important. So that's my. I don't know what you've written in the discussion part of the piece here, but that is where my mind goes on this. So yeah, your thoughts and reflections having completed this research project.
Well, first off, thank you for those kind words. I guess for me, kind of the final piece is really kind of taking it back to kind of these three higher order themes, and really trying to get across that they're not necessarily linear. It's not step one, step two, step three. That they're interchangeable, but really looking at how do we get the right people in quote unquote the right people in the right places, and how do we consider teamwork at those early, whether it be team selection or roster selection or lineup selection, really thinking about people who work well together, people who are kind of great teammates, team players, and then moving into that kind of relationship building piece, and really understanding that teamwork requires so much vulnerability to have to speak and reflect and make adjustments and kind of prepare, requires a real vulnerability, and the relationship is at the center of that. It is the foundation upon which everything is built, and then you're able to sort of maximize this teamwork in action through those amazing tactics that consider people working together, through that hyper competitive but still productive training environment. So really kind of looking at those three pieces as not necessarily a step-by-step guide, but really trying to think about how those can help all the coaches listening kind of inform some of the kind of decisions they're making every day.
And what's next for you in this line of research, Katie?
So stay tuned. We've got another intervention study coming out. So I conducted a season-long teamwork training intervention. So we have a teamwork training intervention, kind of a pilot study that looked at sort of 10 weeks with teams. And then I kind of took that and kind of stretched it out over an entire season. So we did 9 workshops with teams over the course of their entire season. From goal setting, team charters, briefing, debriefing, simulations, feedback, the whole kit. And then another study, hopefully down the pipeline, will be I did a kind of a case study ethnography with one team, really trying to look at the evolution, the developmental nature of teamwork, again, over the course of a whole season. We've got great snapshots of what teamwork looks like, but I really wanted to do a deep dive into the ebbs and flows, the peaks and valleys of teamwork over the course of an entire season.
Fantastic. How exciting. And definitely need to get you back on to discuss that and unpack that. And maybe we can team you up with Desi to come on there, and we can see what your teamwork is like with Desi.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, hopefully we practice what we preach.
Indeed. Hey, look, this has been absolutely fantastic today. Absolutely fascinating to go through teamwork. As I said earlier, we don't do enough on the Sports Social Show. So definitely, hopefully, this is a start of some more input around teamwork and team cohesion. Katie, I know you would have tapped the interest of everybody listening in. So for those who would like to, how can people find you, follow you, and potentially reach out to you?
I'm a terrible millennial. I'm off the grid. I don't have any social media, but I'm an avid emailer. So please feel free to email me, klc82 at bath.ac.uk. Again, nothing fancy, just the old institutional email will do just fine. I'd love to hear from any coaches or anyone doing applied work. Please feel free to email. And Dan, thank you so much. I wrote this in my notes because I wanted to make sure that I said it. First of all, thank you so much for showcasing young, kind of up and coming researchers. I feel incredibly honored I looked at your roster of past guests, and like this is truly like so humbling and an absolute pleasure. And the second thing I wanted to mention is thank you so much for showcasing qualitative research, because we're out here and we're doing our best, and we want to be in the mix with the kind of the big guns out there. So I really appreciate you shining a light on kind of these newcomer, like a PhD student like myself, and the wonderful world of qual research.
Well, I'd say back to you. Thank you for that. And I'd say back to you in two things. I think some of the youngest researchers are some of the best, most inventive researchers. And I also would say from the perspective of the qualitative research, it's I like lots of quantitative research. I like research of all types. However, I do like the qualitative stuff because for me, at the coalface, I love the interviews. To me, it brings to life what coaches, what players, what people in the sporting industry are thinking, and analysing that to me is such a realistic way to reflect upon experiences in sport. So. No, thank you for that, and I will keep them coming.
Love it. Thank you. So this is awesome. So much fun.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that episode, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via X or Facebook to tell me what you think of the show, and if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.